Hey, gorgeous people. Happy Monday morning, November 10th. Jupiter stations retrograde this week. We have Mercury retrograding back into a collision course with Mars. We're going to be talking all about what it is that we believe in and how hard we want it. A lot of the astrology of this week is building anticipation and tension, bringing us into a pretty spicy new moon in Scorpio next week. We're going to get into all of that and more. As always, I am your host, Alexandra Blair of 9 Lives Astrology. Every week here on my transit show, First Light, we drag astrology out of the dry, dusty old transit lists and ephemerides, out of these textbooks behind my head. We try to bring it into stories and examples and art and personal mythologies that you're already living in your everyday life. And if I don't say it enough, I'm incredibly glad that you all are here with me. Normally at the top of the show, I share my favorite comments from the previous week, but I received a lot of incredible comments of support and recognition from you guys on last week's show, and last week's full moon in Taurus felt like a really sweet, restful, supportive, kind oasis in the middle of this scorpionic water trine intensity. And I just wanted to share a little update with you guys. So every week I stand on here and make these videos. And even before I had this channel on YouTube, I did a monthly transit overview podcast. And I am incredibly proud to say I have never missed an episode of either of those podcasts. Even when I gave birth, we were able to make it happen. Honestly, doing this transit work really adds a sense of rhythm and beat to my life. And I know it does the same for you guys because so many of you tell me this every week. And to be totally honest with you all, I am in the middle of some very big changes in my personal life. Every week I share what I'm using the astrology for, but I don't always go in depth about what's going on in my personal life. And I just have a ton of changes that are going on right now. I am moving across the country back to my hometown of sunny San Diego, California, which is a place that I vowed I would never return to. But little did I know that a historic Saturn-Neptune conjunction in my fourth house was going to bring me right back there. This has been a year of very deep endings and bold new beginnings and betting on myself. And this move is going to be me doubling down on that, quite frankly. My son and I are moving forward together to a new old city, and quite a time to do it in this extended government shutdown that is impacting all of us. But I'm betting on myself, and this is a really good astrological week to do something crazy like that. I shared a little bit about what was going on Instagram, and I had some people reach out and ask how they could support me this time. So I've created a new way that you can do that. If my channel, my work, my words have meant something to you, if you found clarity or rhythm or company in them, there's now an easy way to support me back. And obviously booking a reading with me or purchasing one of my workshops is a pretty straightforward way to do that. If you want to light a candle or say a prayer for me and send me some good vibes, it would be much appreciated. And if you feel like offering a little bit of support for my crazy cross-country trip in these crazy, crazy times, you can find the link to my tip jar in the description. I'm honestly really excited about all of these changes. This is where we're going. If you know, you know. Be prepared because the me in 6 months' time is going to be glowing like a goddamn sun. You aren't even going to recognize me. So stay tuned, send me good vibes, and I'll make sure to keep blessing your YouTube feeds every Monday and Friday with little pieces of astrological wisdom. A couple updates last week. I had an awesome turnout for my workshop on planetary transit tracking called Planetary Rhythms. You can now download that workshop on my website as a digital product. So if you missed it and you're interested in learning how astrological media like this relates to your life, and you are interested in cutting through all of these crazy transit lists and figuring out exactly which transits specifically are the most important transits of the year, you can check that out. I went through a bunch of material from my sold out mentorship programs in spring, and then I even did some live chart demos and a Q&A. Seriously, it was one of the most fun events that I've done, and I had a great time. And later today, I may or may not, be launching the year ahead overview event that myself, Sarah Posh, and Whitney Kranz are hosting. It is going to be called, drumroll please, Fault Lines and New Frontiers, the dramatic astrology of 2026, because the astrology of 2026, you know I don't sensationalize. That shit is dramatic. There is a lot going on in 2026, and we knew that going into the transit list, and we still surprised ourselves by seeing some of those transits. So if you're interested in learning about that event, hit the link in the description or check out my Instagram in just a few hours when the rest of the world is awake, you fellow early risers. All right, guys, you know what time it is. Time to grab your coffee. And yes, that's right. There's creamer in my coffee. If you ever need to know the state of the union over here in Blairtown, you can look at the color of my coffee and make an informed decision, because if it's black as normal, it's business as normal. And the lighter that cup of coffee is, the more dire the situation over here. All right, let's get into these transits. On the 11th of November, Jupiter will station retrograde at 25 degrees of Cancer, and it will stay retrograde until March 10th or 11th, depending on your time zone, where it will station direct at 15 degrees of Cancer. On the 12th of November, Mercury, which is currently stationed retrograde, will conjoin with Mars at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. And on the 16th of November, the Sun will receive a trine from Jupiter in Cancer, kicking off those grand water trines and the new moon in Scorpio period that will run through the 21st of November. The moon, for her part, moves from her domicile, conjoining Jupiter in Cancer at the beginning of the week, all the way through late Libra. Now let's dive into this Jupiter retrograde. And I don't always talk about the slower planetary retrogrades because they don't always feel totally relevant. And maybe it's just the fact that this Jupiter retrograde is happening exactly conjunct my descendant, which is a meaningful clue for anyone sleuthing through my gently redacted introduction about the big life changes that I'm currently going through. But this Jupiter retrograde actually feels like a really potent call back to the new moon in Cancer that was conjunct Jupiter around June 25th. Now, at the time, I posted this Instagram series about what I was feeling about that new moon, which was coming home to yourself. And this retrograde is a really natural time to check in with yourself and see how that process has been going in the Cancer part of our charts. And on this show, I'm a malefic and a benefic truther, which means not all malefics are bad all the time, and not all benefics are good all the time. That's something we've covered in detail in my video about Jupiter, because if you're somebody who was born at night, or if you were someone who was born with Jupiter in Gemini, Virgo, or Capricorn, you might be somebody who experiences more of the constructive crisis of faith, enormity of Jupiter, and less of that super magnetic, super lucky, super fortunate, everything's working out for me side of Jupiter. When there's a benefic involved, we can typically have some faith that things are happening for what we call the greater good, or that they are going to be constructive in some way, or that they will benefit us some way in the long run. But that really doesn't do much to help us in the moment when it feels like we are suffering and struggling. I heard from a lot of clients this summer that the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, for example, really did not feel the way that they thought it would. And in fact, I think a lot of people from that YouTube video talked about flooding in their houses. I wonder now if you are somebody who experienced something challenging around that June 25th Cancer new moon date, or maybe around that mid-August Venus-Jupiter conjunction, let me know in the comments. Is that stuff coming back up for you? And do you feel a tie-in from that stuff into what you're going through right now? Now, the general stages of a retrograde involve a planet slowing from our perspective here on Earth all the way to a standstill, and then picking up speed and moving again from our perspective here on Earth backwards in time, slowing down to another standstill, stationing direct, and then picking up speed again. So that is what Jupiter is going to be doing over the next few months. And it will station direct on March 10th or 11th, depending on your time zone, at 15 Cancer. So check out any placements that you have between 15 and 25 degrees of Cancer and try to see how Jupiter might be bringing some wisdom, even if it feels disguised as pain, to that part of your chart. The astrologer Palace K. Augustine published a really lovely workbook for Jupiter in Cancer that I am going to be linking below for you guys to fill out. You can go through their work, and they have incredible questions and art and prompts to think about Jupiter's influence in that Cancer part of your chart. Keep in mind, this is not even quite halfway over, because Jupiter will not leave Cancer until June 30th, 2026. So we actually still have about 7.5 months of Jupiter in Cancer to go. Actually doing a little bit of prep work during this retrograde might help you make more of Jupiter stationing direct and that last little part of Jupiter exalted in Cancer, if that's something you're interested in. This is really like a pit stop in Jupiter's wild ride through Cancer. And don't forget, sometimes stopping for a pit stop is actually the break that you need to get the repairs that are necessary to move faster on the other side of that. And that is a little bit of what Jupiter is doing here, especially because Jupiter is hosting this Mercury retrograde conjunction with Mars in Sagittarius. Be strategic about how and where you're taking your pit stop and what you're refueling with and what you're investing in. Okay, on November 12th, Mercury, who is stationed retrograde, is going to collide with Mars. at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. And this conjunction is the second of 5 that Mercury and Mars are making together. Whitney Kranz and I did a deep dive on that a couple weeks ago. You can check that out. And we went in depth about every single one of these conjunctions. But this one is really setting us up for what is going to happen in just about a week, which is a new moon at 28 degrees of Scorpio that is going to be opposing Uranus, that is going to be conjunct Mercury. That is a very hungry new moon that is coming down the pipeline. And Mercury and Mars together here in Sagittarius are stoking our belief and our vision. And what was really coming to mind for me when I was looking at this is this book, Into Thin Air, which I pulled out of my bookshelf and realized I purchased from a store called 9 Lives Books. So the synchronicities are syncing today, boys and girls. But this book is one of the most incredible wilderness and adventure stories of all time. It is a harrowing tale, and I cannot emphasize that enough, about the deadliest expedition on Mount Everest in the mountain's history, written by John Krakauer, who is the author of Into the Wild, Eiger Dreams, and a few other incredible works of outdoorsy nonfiction. This is one of those books that when you're reading it, it feels like you're watching a train crash in real time. I remember my dad trying to get me to read this book when I was young, and I put it off forever. And then in my 20s, when I got into rock climbing, I started reading this book, and it was like I was reading a ghost story. I was recognizing this spirit of absolute dedication and obsession in these people's hearts with the concept of conquering Everest, in spite of increasingly mounting and increasingly dire circumstances that were telling them that it wasn't going to happen. It is truly a remarkable story of how belief and obsession can lead to victory, and it can also lead to ruin. And that's really what I feel like is happening here with Mercury and Mars, specifically in the visionary and grandiose and philosophical sign of Sagittarius. These two planets are sort of radicalizing, but Mercury is retrograding back, breaking off from that Mars and headed back to inform the Mars-ruled new moon in Scorpio that's actually happening in aversion to Mars. Some of the really interesting points in the story of this expedition to Everest are moments where determination overrode common sense or good judgment. And some of that was related to environmental constraints like a lack of oxygen. And some of that was actually just about the competitive and obsessive human spirit in some of the individuals in the story. Now, if you thought I was only going to give you a depressing and extreme example, then you know me pretty well on this channel. But I'm also going to include a more lighthearted way that I think this Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars in Sagittarius might actually show up. And it is in the form of this book by Matthew McConaughey called Green Lights. Matthew McConaughey actually has Venus and Jupiter conjunct to the minute in Libra in his natal chart, and you can hear it in almost every chapter of this book, which is essentially conveying his belief that things are all going to work out for him at every turn. There is always going to be a green light for him to drive through. And when you see those green lights, you hit them. Exactly the way that Matthew McConaughey seems like he would be and would write is exactly how this book comes across. And it is honestly a really fun read when you need that constructive kind of belief that's going to buoy you into the places you want to go. Just know that that hungry Scorpio new moon next week is coming to make demands. And you may have to root out your own fundamental misbeliefs or your own limiting beliefs at that Scorpio new moon. So even if you can't stomach looking at them here, keep that in the back of your mind and use some audacious belief like we see in Green Lights, or maybe harness the healthiest form of what we hear of that in Into Thin Air and get that into your bones for the astrology of this week. All right, we've reached the portion of the show where we talk about how I, as a pagan, human, animist, astrologer lady here on Earth, am going to be using the astrology of this week. And I'm going to be packing my whole life story into boxes. I was born in San Diego, but I also lived in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland. I moved to New York. I moved to Denver. I lived in Houston. I lived in San Antonio. And now I am closing that loop back to San Diego. Most of those moves were the kind of moves that I made with 2 suitcases, holding all of my belongings and just cutting all of the rest. But I'm a certified self-respecting adult lady now. So I'm going to be packing up my whole life story. All right, babes, you know what that sound means. My sweet little coffee is over, and so the show must be over. Please blow me a kiss across the ether this week. I will definitely feel it, and I definitely need it. And I feel a little like Matthew McConaughey, Zen in the eye of the tornado, or some other little McConaugheyism. I hope you guys all have an incredible week, and I will see you next Monday.